Tonight, I'm sharing 12 of the creepiest, most chilling encounters ever experienced by long-haul truckers, stories that still haunt them to this day. If you want to ride along for more bone-chilling night drives, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another Mr. Rainy Night story. I've run enough miles to know the desert has its own kind of silence. It isn't empty, just quiet in a way that makes small things feel bigger than they should. This was southern Utah on a moonless night, just me and my old pickup, a thermos going lukewarm in the cup holder, and two lanes that looked like a black ribbon laid over nowhere. No radio reception, no glow on the horizon, just the low hum of the engine and the faint hiss of tires on cold asphalt. That's when I noticed the light. At first I thought it was a ranch lamp way out in the scrub, or maybe a reflector off a fence post. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't fixed to anything. It was pacing me, 20, 30 yards out in the desert, drifting parallel with the truck, not bobbing like a headlamp, not jumping like a motorcycle over washboard, just keeping perfect time. I tapped the brakes to see if it'd pass. The light slowed too. I rolled back into the throttle. It matched me again, smooth as you please, like we were linked by an invisible bar. I cracked the window to listen. No engine, no sand kicked up, just the cool desert air and that strange floating glow keeping stride. I told myself a dozen lies in a mile and a half. It's a distant truck. I'm misjudging the angle. It's a reflection off my own headlights. It's a drifter with a powerful flashlight running an ATV without a sound. None of it fit. The light didn't expand or shrink with perspective. It didn't get brighter when I drew even with it. It didn't do anything except hold station. And then, as suddenly as you'd click a switch, it was gone. Not dimmed, not veered, gone. At the same breath, my truck coughed and died like someone pinched the fuel line. All power vanished. Headlights, dash, everything. I coasted onto the shoulder, rolled to a stop, and just sat there in the dark with my hands frozen on the wheel. I don't know how long I waited before turning the key. Long enough to feel foolish, then small, then foolish again. The starter caught, the engine turned over, and every gauge looked like nothing had ever happened. I put it in drive and eased back onto the highway, half expecting that light to swing back into view. It didn't. I drove to the next slice of neon I could find, a squat diner near a junction with 3 pickups in the lot and a flicker in the open sign. I parked under the brightest bulb, walked inside, and ordered coffee I didn't need. The waitress looked at me the way people look at a man who's still listening for something. "Rough road?" she said. "Why do you ask?" "You got the did I just see it face." She poured the coffee, waited. "So, did you?" "What would it be?" "The light." She didn't smile when she said it. "Happens out there. Folks say it's swamp gas, which is funny because we don't have swamps. Others say it's military. Others say it's the desert trying to keep you company. Anybody ever follow it?" "Some do." She tucked the pot against her hip. "They don't get where they're going any faster." A guy in a trucker cap at the counter chimed in without turning. "Sometimes it flips your rig off like a breaker." He drummed the counter with his index finger. "Then it lets you go." I thought that was just me. "Nah," he said. "It's just the desert saying good evening." Nobody laughed. I drank the coffee anyway. When I stepped back outside, the world looked ordinary. The pickup started like it always did. The night had the same empty smell. But the stretch of highway that brought me to that diner felt like it had its own rules, and I'd broken one without knowing. I kept moving. Another winter, another state. North Idaho this time, dropping out of the backside of Coeur d'Alene country with a load of logs under fresh snow that fell mean and wet. The kind that cakes your mirrors, adds weight where you don't need it, and makes every step sound like packing a snowball. The sign said, "Chains required beyond this point," and I didn't argue. I found a turnout below the grade, nose pointed uphill, hazards clicking their slow orange heartbeat while I kidded up. You learn to chain fast or freeze slow. That night I took my time. The grade ahead was switchbacks, stacked like the bones in a fish. I wanted every crosslink seated right. There's a moment in the cold where you stop feeling the cold. Your breath doesn't bite anymore. Your cheeks don't sting. You just move and listen to the tiny things. Chain against tread, a snap as a bungee hooks, the burr of fabric when your sleeve drags past a strap. I was in that pocket when the hair on my arm stood up hard enough to hurt. It wasn't the temperature. It was that other feeling. The one you don't talk about because it sounds like nonsense, like you're being watched. I straightened and listened. No engine on the grade, no plow winding its way down. The forest turned the snowfall into a hush. The only movement was the slow swing of my hazard lights painting the snowbank orange, then dark, then orange again. I told myself to get back to work, so I did. But every fifth motion I'd lift my head and look up the slope into timber blacker than the sky. I saw nothing. That didn't help. When I finished, I snugged the last cam and took a breath. The loader chains were tight, the drives were tuned like a drum, and the trailer looked like a steel centipede. I climbed in, dropped it into low, and crept for the grade. Half a mile up, every switchback came sooner than I remembered. Snow can steal distance like that. You count to 3, you think your nose is clear, and then you're already angling into the next hairpin with your trailer whispering in protest and the logs leaning like a hand on your shoulder. The world shrank to a tunnel of headlight and the faint bounce of reflectors half choked with ice. And then, middle of one of those curves, I saw it. At first it was just a darker dark on the snowbank, a shape not made by drift or shadow. The embankment rose 20 feet on the outside of the turn, a clean cut of white where the plows had bitten deep earlier, now piled even higher by the wind. On that ridge, something stood. I've seen freezer bear grizzlies standing tall in Alaska, and this put me in mind of that kind of scale, except thicker through the shoulders and wrong in a way that made my brain split the difference between animal and person and come up with neither. The shape didn't flinch at my headlights. It just existed there, taking up space in a way that made the cab feel too small. I kept rolling because I couldn't afford to stop on that grade. The wrong stop, the wrong restart. And you burn your momentum and your brakes and maybe your luck. My hands stayed on the wheel. My eyes pretended to be busy with the mirror. But that shape stayed in peripheral focus, and every inch I gained on the curve felt like an inch I took from something that didn't want me to. I came even with it. It moved. Whatever it was stepped off the snow shelf like it was stepping off a curb. Not a tumble, not a slide. A drop, clean as a hammer strike. 20 feet down to the lane, landing beside my cab with a sound I felt more than heard. A deep whomp that came through the frame and into the bones in my forearms. Its shoulders came level with my window, not the top of its head, its shoulders. The rest of it rose above the glass like a wall of fur and shadow. I didn't look straight at it. Call that cowardice or survival, I'm not sure which. I kept my eyes where they needed to be, on the edge of the lane, on the mirror, on the trailer swing, while my brain tried to catalog details it didn't want. The coat on it wasn't like bear fur, not shaggy and uneven. It was thick, rain dark, slicked by snow into lines that suggested muscle underneath. The smell hit a second later, a hot, wild thing that made the warm air from my vents feel suddenly sour. Then it did something I still don't have words for. In a single motion, it crossed the lane and went up the opposite embankment, not scrambling, not sliding, just a long, easy bound, like gravity was something that applied to other creatures. It cleared the cut bank, vanished into the trees, and left me with only the echo of chain on ice and an ease and the thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. I made the rest of that descent like a man threading a needle with gloves on, slow, deliberate, sure. Every sense turned up to 11. The curves stacked, the grade eased, the pullouts appeared and slid past. Only when I hit lower ground and the forest gave way to a valley of farm lights did I let myself breathe. I didn't stop to strip chains at the first turnout, or the second. I didn't want to be out of the cab long enough for my mind to decide it had time to remember what it saw and rearrange it into something worse. I kept the irons on until I was well past the mountain, and the road flattened, and the snow turned to wet, and the wet turned to dry. Then I stopped at a wide lot behind a closed feed store and peeled the chains off one by one with hands that shook and wouldn't admit it. I didn't call anyone. Who would I call? What would I say? I ran the rest of the route, parked, and slept a sleep that didn't do much. A buddy of mine, the religious kind, says I met a demon on the mountain. I don't have theology for that. I have chain burns on old gloves and a memory that still comes back when I smell wet timber and hot brakes. It was sometime in the late 90s, back when I was still running long hauls out of Central Texas. I'd just wrapped up a few days off at home, so I was well rested, coffee in hand, ready for the run down to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early, probably around 4:30 in the morning, and the kind of quiet where even the hum of the tires feels loud. I was on one of those narrow 2-lane winding roads you find deep in the middle of nowhere. Miles of scrub, mesquite trees, and long shadows from my headlights stretching over the asphalt. The kind of road where you don't pass another car for half an hour, and the night feels like it's pressing in on you from all sides. About an hour into the drive, something caught my eye at the very edge of my high beams. At first, I figured it was just roadkill. Happens all the time out here. The shape was low, sprawled on the shoulder, and nothing about it seemed unusual. Until I noticed there was something crouched over it. That got my attention. I slowed just enough to get a better look. My first thought was that maybe some local hunter had hit a deer and stopped to take the antlers as a trophy. It wouldn't be the first time I'd seen something like that this far out. But as I got closer, I realized this guy wasn't sawing off antlers. He was doing something else. Even with the limited reach of my lights, I could see his hands buried in the deer's stomach cavity, pulling something out, meat, organs, and bringing it straight to his mouth. He wasn't just taking a look, he was eating it. Raw. I must have been 30 yards out when he froze mid-motion, head still lowered but turned slightly, as if he was sniffing the air. Then, slowly, he looked up, not at my truck, but directly at me. Through the glass, through the darkness. It was like he knew exactly where the driver was sitting, and that's who he wanted to see. And that's when my stomach dropped. He stood. In one smooth motion, this thing uncoiled itself to full height, and I realized this wasn't just some guy in hunting gear. This was something else. It was huge, easily over 7 feet, and the shoulders were broad enough to make the narrow strip of gravel behind him look even smaller. Its entire body was covered in thick dark brown hair that clumped in places, matted and filthy. The face, God help me, the face was what froze me. It wasn't the blank animal stare you'd expect from a deer or a bear. This was different. The eyes were locked on mine, glinting with something disturbingly human, intelligent, calculating. By now, I was maybe 3 seconds from passing him, my foot pressed harder on the accelerator without me even thinking about it. I didn't care what I was looking at. I wanted as much distance between me and it as possible. The closer I got, the more I could appreciate just how massive it was. I was driving an old Peterbilt 379 with the classic needle nose hood, those long, tall hoods that block a lot of your view of the road directly in front. But as I lined up to pass, I could still see his head above the hood line. That meant this thing was towering. The strangest part? It didn't flinch, didn't back away, didn't even act startled that a fully loaded semi was roaring past just feet from where it stood. It just kept those eyes locked on me, like it was trying to read something in my face. And for the briefest second, as the driver's side window aligned with it, I could swear I felt a kind of recognition in that stare. Not in a friendly way, but in the way a predator looks at prey it knows it could take down if it wanted. I don't know how else to describe it, except to say that whatever this thing was, it understood exactly what I was, and it wasn't afraid. I kept my foot down until my speedometer was brushing past 75, every nerve in my body screaming to get away. My mirrors were useless, just blackness and the faint smear of my own taillights on the asphalt. I drove like that until I reached the lights of the next town, hands locked so tight on the wheel my knuckles ached. Even now, decades later, I can still see those eyes in my mind. Not animal eyes, not the glassy look of some dumb beast caught in the headlights. They were alive, sharp, and aware. I never stopped to check the roadkill. I never went back down that stretch of highway at night again. And if you're wondering whether I think it was some kind of animal, a trick of the light, or maybe even a man in a costume, no. I've been driving long enough to know what's out there on America's roads. This wasn't one of them. Whatever it was big enough, smart enough, and close enough to scare the hell out of me, and that's all I need to know. I've been a trucker for long enough to know that the road can mess with your head. Long hours, dark highways, and the endless hum of tires on asphalt can make you see things that aren't really there. At least that's what I used to think, until one winter night in Arizona proved me wrong. It was a little after 1 a.m., and I was hauling a load of produce southbound on a remote 2-lane highway that cut through miles of empty desert. The air was cold enough that my breath fogged inside the cab before the heater warmed it up, and the night sky was a deep black, scattered with stars. There were no streetlights out there, just my headlights slicing through the darkness and the occasional reflective road sign flashing by. The road was dead quiet. I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 20 minutes, and the CB was silent except for the faint static. I had a thermos of coffee beside me, some low music playing, and nothing but the hum of the engine to keep me company. That's when I saw movement ahead. It started as just a shadow in the distance, maybe a quarter mile down the road. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote crossing, but as I got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a person, a woman, walking along the shoulder, heading in the same direction I was driving. She wore a long, flowing red dress, the kind you might see at a formal event, and her hair was jet black, swaying gently in the breeze. The sight alone made me uneasy. This road was isolated, no houses, no motels, no businesses for miles, and she wasn't dressed for the weather or the location. A voice in my head told me to just drive past, but another part of me wondered if she needed help. It wasn't warm out, and the idea of someone walking here in the middle of the night didn't sit right. I eased off the gas a little as I approached, my headlights washing over her figure. That's when I felt it. An instinctive tightening in my chest, the same feeling I've had a few times in my life when I knew something was wrong. I kept my hands on the wheel, ready to accelerate again, but I slowed enough to get a clearer look. When I drew up alongside her, the details came into focus, and my stomach turned to ice. She didn't have a face, not a scar, not an injury, not even skin where her features should have been. It was just gone. From her forehead down to her chin, there was only a pitch-black void, as if a hole had been cut into reality itself. My headlights seemed to disappear into it, swallowed whole. I froze for a second, staring longer than I should have. Her head turned toward me, and though there were no eyes, I felt her looking right into me, deep, like she could see something in me I didn't want seen. My fight or flight kicked in hard. My foot slammed onto the accelerator, the truck's engine roaring as I left her behind. My pulse was hammering in my ears, and I couldn't stop glancing at my mirrors. But that's when it got worse. For a brief moment, I saw her again. Except this time, she wasn't behind me on the shoulder. She was standing on the side of the road ahead, as if she had somehow moved a half-mile in the blink of an eye. Her red dress swayed in the wind, her faceless head tilted slightly to one side. I gripped the wheel tighter and blew past her without slowing down. The next several miles were a blur. Every dark shape in the desert looked like her. Every shadow on the road made my heart jump. It wasn't until I saw the glowing sign of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of a small town that I finally let myself relax a little. I pulled into the gravel lot, cut the engine, and just sat there for a few minutes trying to steady my breathing. Inside the diner, the warmth and smell of frying bacon was a welcome change from the cold, empty road. A couple of other truckers were seated at the counter, and I slid onto a stool a few seats down. The waitress poured me coffee without asking. I sat there for a while, staring into my mug, replaying what I'd just seen. Eventually, I asked the trucker next to me if he'd ever driven that stretch of highway at night. He gave me a long look before asking, "Did you see her?" I didn't have to say who. He knew. The other trucker leaned in, his voice low. "They say she was a woman killed out here about a year ago. Car accident. Some folks claim she wanders the highway looking for help. Others think she's something worse. Something that's not human, wearing her shape." The waitress chimed in without looking up from her order pad. "Happens more than you'd think. You're not the first driver to come in here looking like they've seen a ghost." I finished my coffee, thanked them, and got back on the road. But I didn't take that same highway again, not at night. Even now, years later, I still remember that faceless void. And sometimes when I'm hauling through the desert in the dark, I catch myself glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see that red dress in the distance. I've been behind the wheel of a big rig for a long time, long enough to see the industry change in ways I couldn't have imagined when I first started. These days, you've got electronic logs that make sure you stop when the hours run out, stricter safety checks, and more rest requirements than ever. But back when I was a young driver in my 20s, things were different. Dispatch could throw you an extra run after you'd already been on the road all day, and there wasn't much you could do about it unless you wanted to risk losing the load or the job. This story takes place in the early 90s, somewhere in the mountains of western Montana. I'd been hauling refrigerated goods out of Spokane, Washington, heading toward Billings. It had already been a long day. I'd put in close to 14 hours when dispatch radioed in another run that needed to be pushed through before morning. I figured I'd tough it out. At that point in my career, I thought I was invincible behind the wheel. I've always been a numbers guy. Even as a kid, I used to make little math problems out of nothing, timing how long it took to walk from one end of the block to the other, figuring out average speed versus total distance, stuff like that. That carried over into my driving. I'd make up little math games to keep my mind sharp. Something like, if I just passed mile marker 100 going 58 miles per hour, how long before I hit 160? It was a way to keep my brain engaged when the hours started to blur together. That night, it was raining. Steady, cold, early spring rain. The kind that slicks the asphalt just enough to make the turns dangerous. The two-lane highway I was on had no real shoulder, just a narrow strip before the ground dropped off into tree-filled ravines. I was winding my way up and down the grades, my headlights cutting through sheets of water, the wipers keeping rhythm like a metronome. It was about 2:30 in the morning when I felt the first real wave of fatigue hit. I tried all the usual tricks, cranked the radio, rolled the window down to let the cold mountain air in, even slapped my face a couple of times. Nothing was cutting through that heavy-lidded drowsiness. I told myself I'd push just a little farther until I found a safe turnout, but the road wasn't giving me one. To keep from nodding off, I started saying one of my math games out loud. "All right, just past mile marker 146, doing 55 miles per hour. So if I keep steady, I should hit 200 in..." My voice trailed off as I blinked, harder than before. My head did that slow forward drop and then snapped back up. I sucked in a breath, trying to shake it off, and for a moment, I thought I'd caught myself in time. I hadn't. When my eyes opened, I wasn't looking at mile marker 146 anymore. The reflective green sign flashing past my windshield read 158. That's when the realization hit me like a punch in the gut. I had just skipped 12 miles of winding mountain road, and not the kind you could coast through with your hands off the wheel. This was a stretch full of sharp curves, blind corners, and steep drop-offs. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel, but I had no memory of the last 10 minutes. My heart started pounding so hard it drowned out the sound of the rain. Worse yet, the truck wasn't pointed perfectly straight. I was drifting toward the outside of a bend that, if I kept going, would send 80,000 pounds of freight and steel straight through the guardrail and into black nothing. Instinct took over. I jerked the wheel just enough to bring the rig back into my lane without fishtailing. The trailer rocked behind me, the load shifting, but by some miracle, I managed to keep it together. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. I knew I needed to get off the road immediately, but the highway still wasn't offering me anywhere safe to pull over. My knuckles were white on the wheel, my eyes scanning every inch of the rain-slick pavement ahead. I drove like that, fully awake now, for what felt like an eternity until I finally spotted a small gravel turnout. I eased the rig over, shut down the engine, and just sat there, staring out at the darkness. The rain tapped against the windshield, the wipers now still. My hands were trembling so badly I had to set them in my lap. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels watched. And even though my cab was locked and the only light came from the dim glow of the dashboard, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in that cab with me during those lost 12 miles. I told myself it was just adrenaline, just the aftermath of a near miss. But a part of me knew there was more to it. I'd driven tired before, too many times back in those days. I'd had moments where I'd catch myself after a second or two of nodding off. But this wasn't that. This was gone. Out cold. For miles. And yet somehow still alive, still upright, still on the road. After a few minutes, I started the engine again and rolled out. The rain kept falling, the road kept twisting, but I stayed wide awake the rest of the way into Billings. By the time I backed into the dock and unhooked, the sun was starting to rise. My dispatcher didn't ask why I was late, and I didn't tell him. Some things are better kept to yourself, not because you're hiding them, but because you know most folks wouldn't believe you anyway. Even now, decades later, I can still see that green mile marker 158 flashing in my headlights, and I still don't have an answer for how I made it there without crashing. For weeks after that night, I couldn't get the image of that mile marker out of my head. Mile 158. I'd catch myself staring at road signs on other runs, thinking about how quickly things could have gone the other way. I'd driven long enough to know the dangers of fatigue. I'd heard all the horror stories, drivers running off the road, jackknifing, ending up in ditches or worse. I'd always figured those guys made some mistake I wouldn't, but the truth is, on that rainy mountain road, I was no different. I was pushing my luck, and by all logic, that should have been my last trip. The strangest part wasn't just that I'd blacked out, it was the way I woke up, exactly in time, as if something had snapped me awake the moment before it was too late. There was no rumble strip to jolt me, no sudden honk from an oncoming vehicle, no loud noise at all, just a sharp, unexplainable instinct that ripped me back into awareness. I've thought about it every way a practical man can. Maybe my brain was working on autopilot and kept the rig on the road. Maybe muscle memory guided me through those curves without conscious thought. But there's a piece of me, one I can't quite silence, that wonders if there was more to it. You see, when you spend years behind the wheel, you start hearing things from other drivers. Stories they tell quietly at truck stops, half joking but with that look in their eyes that says they believe every word. About people seeing figures on the roadside who vanish when you pass. About voices on the CB warning of danger when no one else is tuned in. About feeling a hand on the wheel when you're about to drift into disaster. I'd never been the type to buy into all that. But after that night, I stopped rolling my eyes when someone brought it up. Because if I'm honest with myself, I don't think I made it through those 12 miles alone. Sometimes, when I'm on another lonely stretch of road late at night, I catch myself thinking about my kids, about the life I've had since then. A life I wouldn't have lived if I hadn't woken up at the exact right moment. That thought will stop me cold. Do I think it was an angel? I don't know. But I know this. There's something bigger at work in this world than we understand. Something that, for reasons I'll never fully grasp, decided it wasn't my time yet. That's why I tell this story. Not to scare anyone, but to remind folks, drivers especially, that you're never as in control as you think. You can have all the skill, all the experience, all the reflexes in the world. And still, sometimes, you make it home because of something you can't explain. And maybe, just maybe, that's a kind of grace we don't get to question. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, and in that time, I've heard all kinds of road legends from other drivers. You learn to take them with a grain of salt. Some are just tall tales told to pass the time on the CB, and others, well, they have a way of sticking in your mind. There was this one stretch of road in northern Arizona that kept coming up in conversations at truck stops. Drivers called it County Route 72, but most just referred to it as Dead Road. Nobody ever had the same exact story about it, but the advice was always the same: don't drive it at night. Some swore it was cursed. Others claimed they'd seen lights in the sky that weren't planes, satellites, or anything man-made. One old-timer told me flat out, "You break down on that road after dark, you're on your own, and you might not like what finds you." I'd never had any reason to go that way. It was a narrow, two-lane ribbon of cracked asphalt winding through empty desert with no gas stations, no diners, just miles of cactus, rock, and scrub brush. But one night, running late on a delivery to Flagstaff, I looked at my GPS and saw that County 72 cut about 30 miles off my route. I had two options: stick to the interstate and miss my delivery window, or take the shortcut and maybe get there on time. I remember shaking my head and saying out loud, "Screw it." I turned off the main highway and onto County 72. At first, it was fine. The moon was bright enough to paint the desert in pale silver, and my headlights carved a clear path ahead. The road was lonely, so lonely that it felt like I was the last person left on Earth. The occasional saguaro cactus stood like a shadowy sentry, and the mountains in the distance loomed black against the horizon. My radio was off, and I could hear nothing but the steady hum of my engine. That's when things started to change. About 20 miles in, without any warning, my truck lurched. The dashboard lights flickered like a dying flashlight. I barely had time to mutter, "What the hell?" before everything shut down. Engine, lights, air, dead silent. I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, heart thudding. My first thought was electrical trouble, maybe a dead battery or a bad alternator. I turned the key again. Nothing, not even a click. That's when I noticed just how dark it was. With the headlights gone, the desert night swallowed everything. No streetlights, no cars, no houses, just blackness. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, but the beam barely pushed back the dark. I stepped out and scanned the road in both directions. Nothing, not even the faintest glow on the horizon. I climbed back into the cab and sat there trying to think. I had no cell signal, no way to call for help. I told myself I'd just wait a bit and try the ignition again. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a distant airplane, just a faint glow above the mountains. But it wasn't moving like a plane. It drifted slowly, almost lazily toward me. Then another light appeared beside it, then another. In less than a minute, there were 5 of them, moving together in a loose formation. They weren't blinking. They weren't noisy. Just these bright white orbs gliding silently through the night sky. I froze, watching as they passed directly overhead. My whole truck was bathed in this strange, cold light, not like sunlight, not like headlights, but something else. My skin prickled. My breath came shallow. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know you're being watched, even if you can't see who or what is watching you. I reached for the ignition, desperate to leave, but the truck was still dead. The lights continued their slow journey, gliding past as if I didn't exist. The lights disappeared over the horizon as silently as they had come. I sat in the cab, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white, every nerve on edge. The desert around me was quiet, too quiet. Even the usual night sounds, like crickets or the distant howl of a coyote, were gone. I kept replaying what I'd just seen, trying to convince myself it was something explainable. Weather balloons, military flares, but none of those fit. These lights hadn't drifted with the wind. They'd moved with purpose. I stayed put for what felt like forever. My watch said about 25 minutes had passed before I finally dared to try the ignition again. To my shock, the dashboard lights came on instantly. I turned the key and the engine roared back to life like nothing had happened. No sputtering, no warning lights. Perfect. I didn't waste a second. I threw it into gear and pushed the truck harder than I should have, just wanting to get off that road. When I finally saw the glow of the interstate lights ahead, I let out a shaky laugh. Relief, maybe. Or maybe just nerves. I never took County 72 again. In fact, I started telling my own version of the dead road story at truck stops, though I keep the details vague. Some guys laugh, some nod like they've heard it all before, but every once in a while I see another driver's face go pale, and I know they've been there too. And just like me, they'll never forget it. I've been on the road for years, hauling freight through every kind of weather and along every type of road you can imagine. I've seen plenty of strange things in my time, enough to keep me wondering about what's really out there. But nothing compares to what happened one night in northern New York. It was late, close to midnight, and I was running a delivery to a small warehouse out past a few rural towns. The run was straightforward, about 35 miles along a lonely 2-lane road, cutting through nothing but cornfields and dense tree lines. Out there, you could go a good 20 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. Spring was still hanging on to winter's chill, and the air had that damp bite to it. My rig's headlights cut a pale yellow tunnel through the dark, bouncing off the reflective posts on either side of the road. I had the radio low, just enough to keep my mind awake, but my focus was mostly on the black ribbon stretching ahead. I'd just cleared a long straightaway when the fog rolled in, thick, sudden, and blinding. 1 second, I could see a quarter-mile ahead. The next, my world had shrunk to maybe 30 feet. I slowed the truck down, easing off the accelerator, keeping my hands firm on the wheel. My gut told me to take it careful. Fog like that never shows up for no reason. I crept along for what felt like forever, every nerve alert, scanning for deer or some fool without their lights on. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the fog broke. The night was clear again, the road stretching out clean under the moonlight. That's when I saw them. Off to my left, maybe 50 yards into a field, a man and a woman were walking side by side toward the tree line. But they weren't dressed for a midnight stroll in rural New York. The man wore a tall black top hat and a dark, old-fashioned suit. The woman was in a white dress, long, flowing, the kind you'd expect to see in an old wedding photo from over a century ago. The moonlight caught the edges of her dress, making it glow faintly against the dark field. Their hands were clasped, their backs to me as they moved slowly toward the woods. They didn't look around, didn't react to the rumble of my engine, didn't so much as glance at the world beyond whatever path they were on. I kept driving, my eyes locked on them, until they disappeared into the shadows of the trees. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I let it out in one long exhale. Inside the cab, there was this heavy silence, the kind that feels like the air itself is holding its breath with you. A few seconds later, I caught myself muttering out loud, "What the hell was that?" My voice sounded small in the cab, like it didn't belong there. Even now, years later, I can see them as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The way they walked without hurry, the way their clothes looked wrong against the modern world around them, and the way the fog had rolled in and vanished like it was all part of some show meant only for me. I don't know if they were ghosts, some strange reenactment, or something else entirely. All I know is that stretch of road has never felt the same since, and every time I have to take a load through there, I keep my eyes wide open, just in case I see them again. I've been driving trucks for years, and I've seen a lot of strange things on the road. Drunk drivers, tornadoes, even the occasional UFO-looking light in the distance. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened one night in rural Oklahoma. It was around 2 a.m., and I had pulled over on a quiet back road just off the main highway. I'd been hauling a refrigerated load for nearly 10 hours, and nature was calling. No rest stop for miles, so I eased the rig onto the gravel shoulder, flipped on my hazard lights, and stepped out into the cool night air. The road was dead silent. No traffic, no houses, just the sound of crickets and my truck's low idle. I walked a few steps away, keeping my flashlight aimed low so I wouldn't blind myself. That's when I heard it, a quick rustle in the brush, heavier than any raccoon or stray dog. I froze. Before I could process what was happening, something massive burst out from the tree line about 30 feet ahead of me. My brain couldn't keep up with what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a coyote. It was a lion. A full-grown, golden-maned lion, sprinting across the road like it owned the place. For a second, I thought maybe I'd dozed off standing up, because there's no way that could be real. Lions aren't exactly native to Oklahoma, but this thing was real enough. Muscles rippling under its coat, tail whipping behind it, paws pounding the asphalt as it vanished into the opposite field. I stood there in shock, my mouth hanging open, the hair on the back of my neck standing straight up. I could smell the faint, musky scent of it even after it disappeared. My first instinct was to get back in the truck and lock the doors, which I did in about 2 seconds flat. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the rumble of the engine. I grabbed my phone, still shaking, and called my mom. She answered on the second ring, groggy. "Hello? Mom, you're not gonna believe this," I said, my voice cracking. "A fucking lion just ran across the road in front of me." There was a pause, then she laughed. "What the hell are you talking about? Are you high?" "No, I'm telling you the truth. It was a damn lion. Mane, tail, everything. It was right there in front of me." She sighed. "Son, it's 2 in the morning. You're probably tired and seeing things. Get some coffee and keep driving." I hung up feeling half crazy, half furious. I knew what I saw. And the image of that lion, its eyes reflecting my headlights for just a split second, was burned into my mind. The rest of the night, every shadow on the roadside had me gripping the wheel a little tighter. I kept thinking, if that thing had decided to run towards me instead of across the road, there wouldn't have been much I could do about it. A truck driver versus a wild lion, that's no contest. 3 days later, I was sitting in a diner outside Tulsa having breakfast before my next run. The TV mounted in the corner was playing the local news, just background noise, until a headline caught my ear. "Several animals escape from local zoo." I turned my head just in time to see the anchor listing off the escapees: 2 monkeys, a small bear, and 1 adult male lion. The footage showed a chain-link fence that had been cut, along with a blurry cell phone clip of the lion loping through a grassy field. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. The news anchor said the escape happened just 2 nights before they managed to round up the animals, and that the lion had been spotted roaming an area less than 10 miles from where I'd stopped my truck. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, then laughed out loud, startling the guy in the next booth. Not because it was funny, because I finally had proof. I hadn't lost my mind. I hadn't been hallucinating. I'd actually crossed paths with a lion in the middle of rural Oklahoma. Now, whenever I tell that story to other drivers at truck stops, most of them raise an eyebrow and give me that, "Yeah, sure buddy, look." But I just grin and tell them the truth. Sometimes the weirdest thing you'll see out here isn't a ghost or a UFO or even another driver doing something stupid. Sometimes it's a damn lion in the middle of the highway. I'm not a trucker myself, but this story wouldn't have happened, and I might not even be here today, if it weren't for one long-haul truck driver. I was just 18, working the night shift at a lonely gas station off Highway 84 in rural Georgia. This was the late 70s, before cell phones, before security cameras, and way before I had any real sense of how dangerous the world could be. The station ran 24 hours, but from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, it was just me. No backup, no weapon, just a landline phone, some flickering fluorescent lights, and the steady hum of the coolers in the back. That night started like any other. A couple of truckers had fueled up earlier, chatting just long enough for me to pour them coffee. Then, a little after midnight, he walked in. Something about him set me on edge immediately. He was wearing a tight leather jacket zipped all the way up and matching pants. It was summer, humid, sticky, the kind of night where even the bugs moved slow from the heat. No one wore a jacket unless they were hiding something, and I could see the shape of something under his coat. Long and rigid, pressed against his side. He didn't head for the register or the coffee machine. Instead, he drifted down the aisles, picking things up and setting them back down, glancing over at me every few seconds. His eyes had this jittery, unfocused quality, like he was looking at me and through me at the same time. Later, I'd find out he was high on something. At the time, I just knew I didn't like the way he was sizing me up. There was only one other customer, Earl, a trucker who stopped by so often I almost considered him a coworker. I caught his eye, tilted my head toward the man in the jacket, and said quietly, "Mind sticking around a bit?" Earl understood without me having to explain. He leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee, keeping himself between me and the stranger. After a few minutes of pretending to browse, the guy seemed to get frustrated. Without a word, he stomped out, climbed into a beat-up blue sedan, and tore out of the lot like he had somewhere urgent to be. I felt the tension drain out of my shoulders as his taillights vanished into the dark. Earl stayed a while longer, talking about his route and keeping the place from feeling so empty. Eventually, a couple of other customers came in to use the booths and eat a late-night sandwich. Earl waved goodbye, and I figured that was the end of it. I couldn't have been more wrong. By 3 a.m., the highway was as quiet as a graveyard. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. I'd almost managed to shake off the uneasy feeling that the guy in the jacket had left behind. Then, out of nowhere, headlights came screaming up the road. A car fishtailed into the lot, gravel spraying, and before the engine had even stopped, the driver, another trucker I'd never seen before, jumped out and ran full tilt toward the door. He burst inside, breathless and pale. "Phone," he gasped. "I need a phone now." I pointed to the landline on the counter, and he grabbed it with shaking hands, dialing 911 like his life depended on it. As he talked, I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. He was telling the dispatcher that 40 miles back, at the next closest gas station, he'd found the attendant dead, shot behind the counter. No one else was around. No other vehicles except a blue car, he said, speeding out of the lot when I pulled in. My stomach dropped. I didn't need him to describe the driver. I already knew. The realization hit hard, how close I'd come to being that poor kid at the other station. The only thing that had saved me was Earl hanging around, making the guy think twice. The trucker hung up and slumped against the counter, still shaking. "Never seen anything like it," he muttered. Whole place was quiet. Just him, and that car flying away. The sheriff's deputies came by later that morning to take my statement. They showed me a mugshot. It was him. Same cold eyes, same tight leather jacket. Turned out he was already in the system, either on probation or wanted for something else. They caught him a few towns over, still driving that same blue sedan. The gun was in the car. They told me he was charged with murder and armed robbery. Just like that, one random night at work became the closest I'd ever come to dying. I stayed at the station for a few more months, but every time a car pulled in late at night, my pulse would spike. I'd find myself scanning for jackets in the summer, for hands that stayed hidden in pockets, for eyes that lingered too long. Sometimes I think about Earl, the trucker who stayed with me that night. If he hadn't been there, maybe the guy would have decided I was an easy target. Maybe the deputies would have been showing my picture to the next station down the road. I never saw Earl again. In those days, truckers came and went without leaving much behind. But I hope he's still out there, keeping someone else company on a bad night. And every time I drive past that stretch of highway, I can't help but glance at the empty lot where the other station used to be. It's nothing but weeds and cracked pavement now. I'd been on the road for years, and I thought I'd seen just about everything you could imagine out there. Strange lights in the sky, hitchhikers who vanished the second you looked away, even a full-on tornado that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. But nothing, and I mean nothing, ever rattled me like what happened that night in the middle of nowhere. It was somewhere out in the rural Southwest. I was hauling freight across the country, running a route that wasn't exactly popular. Most drivers preferred to take the main highways, but my dispatcher had put me on this back route because it shaved a few hours off the trip. The thing is, back route was a polite way of saying a long, bumpy dirt road that seemed like it hadn't been maintained since the Reagan administration. The sun had been down for hours and the sky was black as coal. No towns for miles, just dry, open land and the occasional patch of mesquite. The road was nothing but dust and gravel, with deep ruts that forced me to keep my speed down to maybe 20 miles per hour at best. My rig rattled over every bump, and the load in the back groaned with each turn of the wheels. That's when I saw it. Headlights in the distance, faint and flickering through the haze of dust I was kicking up. Another truck, slowly making its way toward me. Out here, that was unusual. In fact, it was so rare that I instinctively slowed down even more, keeping my eyes fixed on the glow. As the lights grew brighter, I could make out the outline of the other truck's cab, and my stomach did this little flip, because it wasn't just any truck. It was the exact same make and model as mine. Same chrome grille, same tall exhaust stacks, even the same dent in the left fender. I chuckled to myself at first. You see other drivers with your same model all the time, but something about the matching dent made me take a second look. We were crawling toward each other, the road so narrow that passing was going to be a slow, careful process. Out of habit, I gave a short blast on the air horn, a friendly "hey there" between drivers. To my surprise, the other truck answered back with the same tone, same rhythm, like it was mirroring me. That little shiver of unease started right then. I leaned forward, squinting through my windshield as the dust swirled between us. The headlights bounced in a way that made the shadows dance across the cab. I could almost make out the driver inside, but not quite. Finally, we reached the point where we had to pass each other. I pulled my truck as far to the right as I dared, my tires crunching over the edge of the dirt road. The other truck did the same, moving slow, inch by inch, our mirrors barely missing each other. And then, I saw him. Not someone who looked like me, not a distant resemblance, me. Same baseball cap pulled low, same flannel shirt, same old worn-out jeans, even the same damn red beard that I'd been growing for years. He was sitting there in the other cab, hands on the wheel, looking straight at me. No nod, no wave, just this cold, blank stare, like he was studying me. For a moment, I felt completely disconnected from reality. My mind was trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was some weird reflection from my own headlights, or maybe another driver who just happened to look exactly like me. But the longer I looked, the more I knew that wasn't it. His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, as if he knew every thought going through my head. The weirdest part? I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't looking at my truck. He was looking through me. Like I wasn't just another driver he was passing on the road. Like I was the copy. We eased past each other, slow as molasses, and the second his cab slipped out of view, I felt this wave of cold air inside my truck. I glanced at my mirrors, but there was nothing. Just an empty stretch of dirt road behind me. No taillights, no dust trail, nothing. I didn't pull over. I didn't stop to think. I just kept my eyes on the road and pushed that old Peterbilt harder than I should have. My hands were slick on the steering wheel and my pulse was pounding in my ears. By the time I made it back to a paved highway, my knuckles were white from gripping the wheel. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. Not my dispatcher, not my family. The only time I ever mentioned it was months later, over a beer with another driver. He just stared at me and said, "Yeah, you saw your double. That's never good." That night was the last long-haul run I ever took. I stuck to regional deliveries after that, routes where I could sleep in my own bed at the end of the day. And no matter where I go, I avoid dirt back roads in the middle of nowhere. Because if I ever see myself driving toward me again, I'm not sticking around to find out what happens next. I'm not a superstitious guy. I've been driving long enough to know that you see some strange stuff out here. People wandering highways, odd shadows in the trees, lights you can't explain, but nothing that's ever truly gotten under my skin. At least not until that night. It was late fall, and I was heading home from a delivery up in Michigan. My Freightliner Cascadia was running light after a drop-off, and I had just a few hours left before I could get back to Indiana and crash for the night. The air was crisp, maybe in the high 40s, and a thin layer of mist was beginning to form over the asphalt. I rolled into this small, half-asleep town just after sunset. Speed limit was 25, and the place was dead quiet. Most of the storefronts were dark, save for a couple of bars with neon signs still buzzing. I remember the smell of wood smoke from someone's chimney drifting into the cab. That's when I saw him, or it. He was standing just off the sidewalk near the intersection, directly under a weak street lamp. A long black robe covered him from head to toe, the hood pulled low enough that I couldn't see his eyes. His hands hung loosely at his sides, and he didn't move an inch. The only thing that told me he was alive was the faint rise and fall of his chest. I slowed for the red light, trying not to stare, but every instinct I had was telling me something was off. It wasn't Halloween, it wasn't a parade or a festival, and yet there he was, facing me dead on. The light turned green, and I didn't waste time easing back onto the gas. As my truck rolled past, his head turned slightly, tracking my movement until I was gone. I chalked it up to some local eccentric and figured that'd be the end of it. But less than an hour later, I was back on the highway, miles from that town, when my headlights swept across another figure. This one was standing just off the shoulder, right beside a speed limit sign. Same black robe, same hood pulled low, same stillness. Only the background had changed. The road out there was nothing but farmland and patches of forest. No reason for anyone to be standing out there at night, especially dressed like that. As I passed, I could swear his head turned to watch me. My grip on the wheel tightened. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe a prank, maybe some religious group doing whatever they do. But two sightings like that, so close together, in the middle of nowhere, that didn't sit right. I kept driving, my eyes scanning the dark edges of the road. Eventually, I pulled off into a rest area that doubled as a small park. I figured I'd get out, stretch my legs, and check my load straps. It was quiet except for the crunch of gravel under my boots and the hum of my engine idling behind me. Then my headlights caught something between the bare trees. Another figure. About 40 or 50 feet away, standing in the open field of the park, was a third one. Same robe, same hood, facing me, motionless. This time, the cold hit me deeper than the weather could account for. My skin prickled and my stomach knotted up. I didn't like how deliberate it felt, like they weren't just standing there, they were waiting. I didn't stick around to find out what they were waiting for. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and pulled out of there fast. My eyes kept darting to the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights behind me, but the road stayed empty. By the time I made it home, I'd talked myself into thinking it had to be some bizarre coincidence. 3 different people, each doing their own weird thing. But the unease wouldn't leave me. A couple of days later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for any events, protests, or religious gatherings in that area that might explain it. Nothing came up. Not a single news story, no Facebook posts, no chatter from other drivers. When I mentioned it on the CB, all I got back was static and jokes. Nobody else had seen anything like it. Years have gone by since that night. I've driven that same stretch of road dozens of times, never spotting them again. But sometimes when the fog gets thick and the moon's hanging low over the highway, I find myself scanning the ditches, the fields, the tree lines, half hoping I don't see another black-robed figure, and half afraid that I will. Because deep down, I still can't shake the question, were they 3 different people? Or was it the same thing, keeping pace with me no matter where I went? I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. At 23, fresh out of college, I thought nothing could faze me. My newlywed husband and I had decided that instead of diving straight into the grind of a 9-to-5, we'd try something different, team trucking. It seemed like the perfect way to make good money, see the country, and spend time together before life got too settled. We split the driving in a way that worked for us. I took the 2 a.m. to noon shift. He handled noon to about 11 p.m., and then we'd park the truck for a few hours so we could both sleep without the constant motion. It wasn't perfect, but it gave us breathing room on long hauls. That night, or more accurately, that morning, I was somewhere in Arizona, cruising through an empty stretch of desert highway. It was around 4 a.m. The road ahead was a ribbon of dark asphalt cutting through nothing but shadows and scattered desert brush. I had the radio off, the CB off, and just the steady hum of the engine for company. Then I noticed headlights approaching in my mirror. A pickup truck pulled up alongside my rig, close enough for me to see the driver clearly. He was a white guy, maybe in his 40s, wearing a baseball cap and leaning toward the passenger window to get my attention. He started waving something at me. At first I couldn't make out what it was, but then I realized it was a CB radio. I sighed. I rarely kept my CB on. Too much trash talk, too many people looking for drama or trouble. But I flipped it on anyway. A crackle of static, then his voice. "Ma'am, you've got a blown tire. You'd better pull over before it shreds your rim." My stomach dropped for a second. A blown tire at highway speeds can be a nightmare. But the truck still felt steady. No vibration, no pulling, nothing that screamed tire trouble. Still, I figured maybe I'd stop at the next truck stop to check. I thanked him, keeping my voice polite but guarded. I expected him to just nod, maybe wave and move on. Instead, he stayed right alongside me. "You should pull over now," he said through the CB. "It's dangerous to keep driving like that." "Appreciate it," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I'll get it checked up ahead." That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. For the next 40 miles of absolute nothing, he kept pace with me. Every couple of minutes, he'd key up the CB again. "You really should pull over. Could be dangerous." "It's not worth the risk, ma'am." "Just take the next turnout, I'll help you look." His voice had gone from helpful to pushy, and from pushy to insistent. There was something in his tone that set my teeth on edge. I couldn't see his license plate clearly in the dark, but the pickup was older, maybe a mid-90s Ford, paint faded and streaked with dust. The desert can make you feel isolated in ways you don't expect. No streetlights, no traffic, just the endless hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional sign reminding you that the next town is still X miles away. And here I was, boxed in by this guy who apparently wasn't going to let it go. I kept my speed steady, eyes locked on the road. My hand hovered near the air horn chain, just in case. I didn't want to hit the brakes hard, didn't want to signal fear, didn't want to give him any opportunity to pull me over on his terms. Finally, I saw the glow of lights in the distance. A pilot truck stop. Civilization. I eased off the throttle, took the exit, and swung into the well-lit lot. The moment I turned in, the pickup peeled off. No signal, no slowing down, just shot straight down the highway like nothing had happened. That told me all I needed to know. I climbed down from the cab and walked the length of my trailer, running my hands over the tires. Every single one was fine. No flats, no leaks, no damage. I stood there in the pool of white light from the parking lot lamps, my breath visible in the cool early morning air. My gut twisted when I thought about what could have happened if I'd listened to him out there in the dark, with no one around. I don't know if he was looking to rob me, hurt me, or worse. But I do know that my gut told me don't stop, and it probably saved my life. Since that night, I've kept my CB on when I'm driving, not because I want to hear the chatter, but because sometimes, just sometimes, you need to know what's being said about you on the airwaves, and because there are good truckers out there who'll look out for you. But I've also learned this: in the middle of nowhere, with a stranger pressuring you to do something that doesn't feel right, you owe them nothing. Trust your instincts. Keep moving. I've driven southbound on I-75 more times than I can count, and by now, I know every curve, every mile marker, and every gas stop worth pulling into. That night, it was winter in Ohio, freezing wind, road salt in the air, and that kind of gray, lifeless sky you only get up here between January and March. The roads were slick, but not ice rink slick. I'd been keeping my rig steady at about 60, giving plenty of room between me and the next vehicle. It was just past 10 p.m., the kind of time when most people were already in bed, but for me it was prime trucking hours. Fewer cars, fewer idiots, and just the hum of the CB keeping me company. I had the heater on low and my thermos of coffee wedged in the cup holder. I'd been hauling south for a couple hours without seeing much of anything unusual, Just a few snow flurries and the occasional deer hanging around too close to the tree line. But the thing about winter driving is, you learn fast to keep your eyes everywhere. It's not always the snow you see coming that gets you. It's the guy behind you, or the one coming off a ramp a little too hot for the conditions. And that night, I was about to see one of the most insane things I've ever witnessed in decades on the road. I was rolling past an on-ramp, maybe a quarter-mile ahead, when I spotted headlights swinging onto the entrance. Looked like a compact car, something like a Chevy Cobalt, coming in from the right. Now, it's winter, it's night, and this guy's already carrying way too much speed for the ramp. I could tell just by the way his headlights tilted in the curve. He wasn't slowing down enough to merge safely. I remember thinking, he better know what he's doing, or he's gonna eat it. Sure enough, halfway through the curve, the back end of the car kicked out. He overcorrected, and in an instant, the whole vehicle went sideways like a hockey puck. There was no saving it. I watched, mouth open, as the car slid completely off the ramp. It dropped at least 6 feet down onto the shoulder of I-75, hard enough that I expected the suspension to explode on impact. But somehow, the thing landed on all 4 wheels like it was a stunt driver's trick. Before I could even process what I'd just seen, the driver kept going. No hesitation, no pulling over to check the car. He spun a full 360 degrees right there on the shoulder, tires throwing up a storm of road salt and slush, and somehow, miraculously, he straightened it out. And then, this is the part that still blows my mind, he just merged into northbound traffic like it was nothing, like it was the most normal maneuver in the world. I swear, if you hadn't seen the drop, you'd think he'd just taken the ramp as intended. For a good 5 seconds, I just sat there with my jaw hanging open, one hand on the wheel, the other half reaching for my CB mic. I wasn't the only one who saw it. The CB lit up like the 4th of July. Holy shit, who else just saw that? Was that a Cobalt? Tell me somebody got that on dash cam. Ain't no way that car's still running after that drop. Drivers from both sides of the interstate were chiming in. Guys heading north swearing they saw the whole stunt from the front. Guys heading south asking if anyone knew the driver. One trucker said he thought the car had to be stolen because no sane person would drive like that. Another guy said maybe it was a teenager who didn't realize how close they came to rolling. Me, I didn't know what the hell to think. I just knew I'd seen something physics shouldn't have allowed. That little car should have been totaled right there on the shoulder, maybe even flipped. But it drove away like nothing happened, disappearing into the flow of headlights going north. The chatter lasted a good 5 minutes before dying down, but even after the CB went quiet, I couldn't shake it. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to figure out how they didn't lose control completely, or blow out a tire, or snap an axle. Some people might call it luck. Some might call it skill. Me, I think that driver just burned through every ounce of good fortune they had left in life. And somewhere out there, I imagine that Chevy Cobalt is still rolling, quietly carrying a story its driver will never tell the way the rest of us saw it. The sound of wind whistling through the cab, rain easing into a soft drizzle. 12 stories, 12 night runs no trucker ever wants to live through twice. Out here, in the dead of night sometimes, the thing watching you isn't from this world at all. If these stories kept you looking over your shoulder, don't forget to leave a like so I know you want more. And subscribe to keep riding with Mr. Rainy Night into the dark, where the shadows are never truly empty.